Okay, here we go. So, with me today, I have Robin Harris from Wellbeing coming to us from Wales, which I find quite impressive to get our time frame here just right so we can make this time work for all of us. And the topic that we have today is the importance of pause, which falls in place with the categories of self care that we have been talking about throughout this summit in the social category. And so, Robin, before we even really get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you fell into this journey?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tanya, for having me here. It's just a delight to chat with you and to
Oh,
speak
thank
about my
you.
passion for well-being. And basically, I got into this because it was my own journey. As I think so many people who work in well-being, that is the case. We've got to the point where we feel deeply challenged for our own well-being. So we go off on a journey. This was certainly my case. I went off to try and find what was going to help me feel better because I had tried the more maybe traditional ways of going to the doctor, trying medication, being referred to counseling. And those at that time, this is 20 odd years ago, were not working for me. So it was then a matter of going off and looking for, well, what are my options? What could I do? How can I find? And it was only recently that looking back, I realized what I was looking for was empowerment, was to feel I've got this. I've got the resources I need. I've got the tools I need. I've got them. They're mine. That sense of ownership, autonomy, agency, which I guess up to that point I didn't feel I had, which was a large part of why I was so miserable and why I'd ended up being quite ill. So I set off on this journey to find those things. And for me, that journey took me very much into nature and what is our own nature and what is it to be true to that nature. I did a lot of reading. I'm a bit of a bookworm, and
Same.
some they're great, aren't they? Such an amazing world to go into, and so many different worlds that you can experience. But I read something that said when we move away from our true nature, that causes us discomfort. And that's our body's way of speaking to us because it doesn't have words. It can only speak to us through physical sensations and emotions. So I think of it now like a lane assist that you get in some cars, that if you start to drift out of your lane, an alarm goes off. And that's the same for our body. Our body knows its lane. Our body is such a biological, wise system. And it tells us stuff all the time when we know how to listen and interpret and understand. So this lane assist just is our body giving us a little nudge. You've slightly drifted away from who you really are, who you were born to be. Let's just steer back to that because I very much believe that our purpose is to be as me as I can be, because that allows me to bring my gifts, my light to the world. And I believe that every single one of us has our own set of gifts that are unique to us. And if we don't bring them, nobody else will.
Mm,
Not to be a second class somebody else, but to be a first class me, be a first
love
class you.
that. That's so
And
good. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
not just that, that's what fills us up. That's what helps to keep us healthy and well because we're doing what we're here to do. We're in our zone.
Hmm.
And it shares so much with the world.
Yeah. I think the thing I love so much about these interviews is that I hear so many stories that are so similar to my own and to the people that I work with that it resonates so deeply for me. There are like five things there that I'm writing notes that I want to make sure that I connect back to. But before we do that, so the name of your business is Wild Wellbeing, and Wild is all capital. So I'm assuming that is an acronym for something. What is that?
Like I said, nature was very big for me, and my own healing journey involved very much getting more in touch with nature, the nature in which I live and which I am a part of, and that is part of me. And going along my journey, I came across these different elements. And because it's the word wild and it relates to nature, I thought that was quite a good connection. But it's, if I go through each letter in turn, the W is for wonder. And it's that idea of seeing the world with eyes of wonder. As we get older and get into adulthood, sometimes we could become quite cynical and jaded, and
Oh,
like,
so much.
you can even just, yeah, you can see it in our body language, can't you? It's like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulder, all those worries and anxieties and baggage that we're carrying. Whereas if you look at a little child, they're just, oh, it's so exciting, and why is that, and what's a rainbow, and all of
Mhm.
those things. Or they see the ocean or the stars or the moon. I always have had a fascination with the moon. There's this rock hanging up out there, and how I used to sit at my window when I was a child and look at the moon and all the different phases of the moon, and you can see some kind of uh, almost craters. You can see the features on the surface, and just to think that's something way out there. And then people go out there in rocket ships, and
Mm.
that sense of we're so small, really.
Mhm.
And therefore, kind of that sense of perspective.
Mhm.
But when we can keep that beginner's mind, that joy and sense of awe, because our bodies are amazing. This life, this world is amazing. And when we can bring joy into all of that, enjoy, literally bring joy
Oh, I
in,
love that. Mhm. Mhm.
which is a choice.
It
We
is a
can bring our
choice.
own joy in. We don't have to rely on external things,
Yep.
giving ourselves that permission. So that's W. I is intuition. Again, our true nature, listening to our true nature, allowing that to guide us, and reading and learning that we have three brains. We've got the head brain, the heart brain, and the gut brain. The
Mhm.
heart brain has more electromagnetic activity than the head brain. That blew my
Mhm.
mind, because we always think of how much is going on up here in our heads.
Right.
But the heart has so much to share and so much wisdom that helps to balance out some of that overly analytical thinking. And our gut sends sends more information to the brain than the brain does to the gut. And people say trust your gut
Mhm.
for a reason. So having those three and bringing them all into play and balancing out and listening to all of them, I think is so important. And it's our inner compass, our inner sat nav, our inner guidance. L is loving ourselves as we are and also as we are not. We live in such a world of comparison these days, and we look at social media and we think, I should look like that, I should live like that, I should drive that car, I should wear those clothes, I should be eating that food, or whatever.
Mhm.
And we find ourselves wanting, rather than celebrating all the things that I am and all the things that I have. When we're doing the comparison, we're living in a world of lack. When we're celebrating who we are and what we've got, we're living in a world of abundance and joy and gratitude, all those high level vibrations that are so healing, as
Mhm.
opposed to the resentment and anger and frustration and all of those others that just
Jealousy.
weigh
Yep.
us, yeah, weigh
Mhm.
us down.
Mhm.
And then D is dance. Because I used to think it's one step forward and two steps back. Or somebody said to me recently, their life felt like one step forwards and 10 steps back.
Mhm.
But don't we do that when we dance? When we can take off that feeling of it's a test, we're being judged, it's a competition, I have to get to a certain level, and just think, I'm dancing, I'm having
Mhm.
fun, I'm exploring, I'm trying this out. And if that doesn't work, no problem. I'll try this out. I'll go in this
Mhm.
direction. It's just experience. And I think that our purpose is to be as me as I can be, and to encourage, therefore, everybody else to do the same. And if we're all just here having fun, it's all just experience. I don't need to be better than you. I'm certainly not worse than you. We're just all on the same path. We're all leading each other home. I love that saying.
I do too. Yeah.
And in giving myself permission, I love the quote from Marianne Williamson. That was one of the first things I read that really struck me, that we're not afraid of our dark. Our fear is actually
Mm.
about our light. But who are we to play small? My playing small doesn't serve anybody. Whereas if I connect with my light and allow that to shine, effectively I liberate myself and I liberate others. We were talking about energy earlier before we came on air.
Mhm.
And it's that idea of just that vibration. Any vibration that I hold, I can share it with others, like a
Yep.
tuning fork.
Yep.
That entrainment idea, co-regulation. And if we
Hmm.
were all co-regulating from a place of being
Ah,
grounded
we're not
and
usually doing that to the positive, are we?
often not, sadly, but when we
Right.
get into the downward spiral, we just keep going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because as I'm listening to Dr. Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself at the moment, and he talks so much about how our thoughts affect our inner chemistry and
Mm-hmm.
physiology, which then affects our thoughts, and
Mm-hmm.
it just goes around. But
Right.
it goes around in the direction that we've started, unless we interrupt the cycle. So if we're
Mm-hmm.
going upwards, then we're already set looking for the joy and looking for the wonder and looking for the
Mm-hmm.
love and the happiness. And we'll keep going that way
Right.
because that's what we're creating and manifesting. But if we start feeling, oh, this isn't so good, and I'm not as good as that other person, and they've got more than me, and I'm really angry and I'm
Mm-hmm.
frustrated, and I'm making those comparisons, and I'm jealous, then it just keeps going down unless we find a way to interrupt. Because
Yep.
that's where I was. And I was blaming everything out there, out
Mm-hmm.
there, out there. And
Mm-hmm.
then my mum said, when you point, there's one finger going out. What are all those other fingers doing?
Oh my
They're
goodness, I've
going
never
right
thought
back to
about that.
yourself. No,
Yeah.
I hadn't until my mum said. My mum was amazing, is
Yeah.
amazing. Um, so all of these things just came together to be
Yeah.
wild. And I love the idea that it's okay to be wild. It's okay to be
Mm-hmm.
a little bit out there. My
Mm-hmm.
husband says to me, I'm not wild, I'm not weird, you're weird. And I go, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm
I'm
perfectly okay
I'm
with that. It took me
delighted
a
that you
while, but
think
I am okay with that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love that so much. There's so much goodness in just what you have designed your business to be called is just embodies everything, right? That's sum it over. We're done. Like I don't need to interview anybody else. It's just there it is. So I love that so much. And again, there's so much from there that we could just derail and go off into any one of those topics because there's so much goodness there. But let's start with this. So you have a book, and that book aligns with my entire being. So I'm going to buy it so that I can read it because that is a necessity. But I think the just some of the things that you have talked about already aligns to where I'm going. And so for me, I spend a lot of time talking about authenticity, which I feel like is a very trendy word, and I don't necessarily love it. But also, if you are not being authentic to yourself, which is exactly what you have been talking about within the name of your business and like living your purpose and the sat nav, I love that analogy where it's going to protect you from going outside of those lines. If you are not doing that and you are being forced or you are allowing yourself to feel forced to live up to someone else's expectations or what you believe are their expectations, because I think that has been for me the most sort of enlightening thing for myself and for clients is those were never expectations for you. You thought they were expectations for you. I was terrible about that. And I did that a lot for myself. And I still do, still catch myself pulling back on that. So I think that whole piece sort of brings me to your book and how you got to this book, which is called Take a Walk on the Wild Side. Am I correct with that? I love the name of that book. And I love that you engage nature in all of this because of course nature is so good for us in all of the things that we do. But why don't so for me, like the authenticity piece is where I really resonated with where I think you go in this book. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about that and what we could expect if we were to read the book?
Authenticity, like you say, it's a bit of an overused word, and it's been a bit, I guess it's kind of like love as well, how love has been taken over by media and
Mhm.
used and abused. And I think authenticity, any word that becomes a buzzword, I
Yep.
think that
Yeah.
happens with with those words. But for me, when you were saying about how we maybe Brene Brown calls it confabulation,
Mhm.
where we're projecting all of these things. This person has this expectation on me, and they probably don't. It's
Mhm.
probably something that we have confabulated in our own heads. But I love where Gabor Mate talks about when we are tiny, we have two things that we absolutely need in our lives. We need attachment and we need authenticity, because our authenticity was what kept us safe. When we were hunter-gatherers, our authenticity let us know, does this feel safe? Is there a predator in the area? And you can watch drama or nature programs on the television, and you can see where the herd of zebra or antelope know that that lion is not hunting, and they're perfectly safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as that lion, a bit peckish, I think I might start to hunt, they'll run. They just know.
Yep.
Animals pick
Mm-hmm.
this up. Rupert Sheldrake talked about that morphogenetic field where this is just in the energy. And when we are tuned in, we pick it up. Whatever animal you are, you can get a sense of what's going on, what other animals are doing. Am I safe? Am I not? So we have that need for authenticity, but our need for attachment is even more, it's the main one, because if we don't have attachment as a tiny infant, we don't get fed, we don't get clothed, we don't get that co-regulation with our caregiver or parent. So anytime, if we feel being authentic, expressing ourselves and our true selves risks our attachment, we'll drop the authenticity. And if our parent is not able to be emotionally present and give us the co-regulation we need, we might be crying out for support. But when you're a small child, an infant, or 2-year-old, the terrible twos, and we've such like the negative spiral again, we label things the terrible twos. That's just
Mm-hmm.
a child expressing themselves in the only way they can, like the body. They may not have the cognitive abilities, the language yet to say, actually, I feel XYZ. They just scream.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could sit down with them and just let them express themselves, and then when they've calmed down, talk to them in whatever way they can manage at their age with their language, then maybe we could find an answer. Or at least they would feel heard, and they'd probably feel a lot happier then anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are distracted, if we are depressed, if we are worried about the economy or the politics or the state of the world, or we're sitting on our mobile device, then maybe we're not paying attention to the child and giving them that expression. And maybe we haven't felt heard, so it's very hard for us to listen. And again, it's just that negative spiral, and you can see how things get passed down from generation to generation. If one didn't feel heard, they feel less able to hear the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. And you can see why some parts of the world are going the way they're going. But you can also see where they've brought in things like meditation in schools, or meditations they've done research where they've brought in people to an area and they've done meditations and seen how that area has changed. There's less violence, less crime,
Mm-hmm.
less trouble for the police.
Mm-hmm.
Or with the Joe Dispenza book that I'm reading at the moment, they did sent healing prayers, thoughts, intentions. And when he describes the research at the end, he said, and those people were in hospital 10, 50, whatever it was, I can't remember how long ago, years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we can send things back, we can
Yep.
send things forward.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to meditate now, we can make change. And if we come together, that doesn't just mean one person and one person and one person, it's exponential.
Mm-hmm.
So if we realized that, if we broke our negative cycle of thinking and expectations and confabulation and started to take ownership and agency, we could really make such a huge change. But just to go back to saying that if people aren't feeling able to be authentic, authentic can actually literally feel life threatening if you
Mm-hmm.
haven't been able to be that way as a child, because our brain just goes, our basic lizard brain goes life, death, black, white.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can't be authentic because it threatens my attachment, that threatens my life, I could die.
So
And
true.
because if that happens when we're tiny children, we don't register it logically. It gets stored in our cellular memory. So as adults, we might think, I don't know why I can't be authentic, but it scares the living daylights out of me. I literally go into a blind panic. I go into survival mode. I go
Mm-hmm.
into fight or flight. I
Mm-hmm.
start doing distractions. I start doing addictive behaviors or self-medicating or whatever it might be. And I don't understand why.
Yeah.
It'll
I
be
go ahead. I have the
because
most
of a
like
lack of sleep.
phenomenal example of that I've recently shared in my podcast. But so I was in a professional role. I had a supervisor that was not very nice. Like she led by sort of fear and manipulation and just really made a point of holding people down. And there were just lots of conflicts and you always felt like you were on edge and you couldn't be comfortable. And so add that to this whole like fear of my own authenticity and what I thought the expectation of me was in terms of life in general. There's lots of stuff there. And I found suddenly that I couldn't publicly speak. And so if you put me in front of a group, even if it was on a Teams meeting with colleagues or in front of a group of 200 people, no matter what the situation was, I suddenly couldn't do it. I would shake. I would have like such bad anxiety. My heart rate would spike. And then it just kept escalating because once it happened, then I started being afraid of it. And so then it just kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger until it it sort of like escalated into like full-blown panic attacks where I would start to black out. Like the black would start to come into my vision. I wouldn't be able to pull air into my lungs. I was breathing, like my chest is going up and down, but there is no air coming into my lungs. I've had to leave the room. I've had to stop the presentation. It was so awful and ugly for me. Fast forward to that leader leaves, I get a new one who does nothing but build up your confidence, make you feel good about who you are. Also, my own sort of like understanding that I'm now setting boundaries for myself. I'm not allowing these expectations to be mine anymore. I'm deciding who I am and who I want to be, and I'm putting it out there regardless of what anybody thinks about me. And suddenly I can stand up in front of 500 people and it is not a problem for me. Just not a problem. I don't even think about it anymore. It was so bad at one point that I refused to wear dresses, which I wear dress a lot because I'm just very comfortable in them. But I refused to do it because I was afraid I would pass out and the dress would go over my head, further mortifying myself. Could you imagine that? It was that bad. But then all of the sudden, I am presenting myself the way that I want to present myself and believing in that, and it just melts away. It's no longer a problem. So it goes right back to what you're talking about with the fight or flight. Like, just be who you want to
And
be.
shows how much is going on in our
Mm.
heads that then
Mhm.
plays out in our bodies, but also how easy, kind of simple,
Right.
anyway, maybe not
Right.
easy, but simple it is to completely flip
Yeah.
that
It
around.
didn't wasn't the trainings, it wasn't the meditation, it was all like I was trying to do all of these things to surround it, and all it
Yeah.
came back to was mindset and belief in myself, which sounds like, "Oh, yeah, sure, no problem." You can't no, you really can. It is but we talked a little bit about perception earlier, like your perception is your reality, but you
Yes.
get to decide what that reality looks like.
Beautiful.
Yay. All right. So I love that. I'm going to link the book in the notes to our conversation. But also earlier, we talked about some of the workshops you do and like what is the sort of the meat behind those. And I found it to be very fascinating. So why don't you share a little bit about those as well?
I do a lot of workshops just around self-care, around perception and how this supports our well-being. Because my journey was very much, like you said, coming to that realization that I do have choice. I can give myself permission to do these things. It changes up here in my head and then it changes out there in the world.
Hmm.
So that's my aim, to take away people's fears, to give them permission, to help them to realize and give themselves permission to take back their own agency, to make their own choices, and to know that that's okay.
Hmm.
That when you make your own choices and you make them from the right place, grounded, centered, listening to your body, they'll work for you. And that's the best thing you can do, not only for yourself, but for everybody else around you.
Hmm.
And in doing it for yourself, you role model it to everybody else around you as well.
Yep.
But one of my favorite workshops to run is called Introduction to Meta Consciousness. But my title for it is Unlocking Healing Wisdom, Decoding the Language of Your Symptoms.
I love that
And
so
then
much.
subtitle Introduction to Meta Consciousness. Because meta consciousness is the thing that when I had it done for myself and then trained to become a trainer in it. It blew my mind, and it just made sense of everything, made sense of what had been happening in my life, helped me to put together all the things that I had learnt and kind of go, yeah, of course. Now I understand. Before they were a set of separate things, but now they just come together and they make sense to me, and I can see how I can use them in my practice to support others. And it's kind of what it says on the tin, meta being overarching consciousness, awareness. And it's
Mhm.
that overarching awareness of my body, and that it is a biological, very wise system, always doing its very best to support me. Unfortunately, sometimes I am living from a belief of fear, of lack, of those negative, uh, low energy vibrational thoughts. And so my body is just making adaptations because of those thoughts that I'm thinking. But if I'm coming from that place of lack and fear, that's the kind of adaptations it's making.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I'm coming from that place because I've experienced stress, trauma, something. And trauma, I think that's another one of those words like authenticity. It has been overused, and kind of we've
Right.
lost the sense, because people
Mhm.
will say things like, oh, that film traumatized me. It may have reactivated past trauma. That's
Mhm.
very possible,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't have been the initial trauma. And we think of trauma as being the big things. So the 9/11, the tsunami
Mhm.
disaster, or being in a very serious car accident, maybe a
Yep.
pileup on the freeway, something like that.
Yep.
Or the death of a loved one, maybe a parent when you're very young. And of
Mhm.
course, those are traumatic. Of course they are. And they will
100%.
potentially
But it's not the
show up.
discomfort that a lot of people it's not the trauma is really just discomfort, which I think a lot of people are associating with trauma. It's not trauma, it's just discomfort. We all get to determine what our definition of trauma is and how it impacts us. But I also, especially with younger generations right now, they're just that made me uncomfortable and therefore I am traumatized.
Yeah. Yeah. And Gabor Mate's description is that it's not what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us in response to what happens to
Mhm.
us. So it's a very subjective,
Right.
individual thing. Two siblings growing up in the same family, going through the same
Mhm.
experiences, one may be
Mhm.
traumatized, the other not.
Yep.
And it can be those small cumulative things. And for me, a lot of it was that. And a lot of it also was my response to things. So again, the confabulation and the thoughts and the
Mhm.
meaning that we put onto things,
Yep. Mhm.
that again, Gabor Mate was talking about how it restricts us, how it limits us. So if something is keeping you small in some way, like you said, you were afraid to get up and speak, and you had all of
Mhm.
these thoughts of the things that might happen, and going into a panic attack, and then maybe I'll faint, and then maybe my skirt will come up over my head.
It just escalates.
Yeah, because we do. We add more
Mhm.
and more and more because the fear just keeps expanding. But it has a purpose. Its
Mhm.
purpose is to keep us safe.
Right.
So we can, when we know that, we can celebrate it. Thank you so much. You were trying to keep me safe, and that was your purpose, and I'm so grateful. But now I've got this, and I get to make the choices, and I get to make those choices from a place where I feel, hopefully, if I can create this for myself, feel safe, feel secure, and build on that.
Mhm.
So I expand my world rather than contracting my world. And when our body makes adaptations, those adaptations can lead to symptoms, but the symptoms are information. They're nothing to be afraid of, particularly if we catch them early.
Mhm.
Yes, at times things can escalate, they can be very intense, but we can even work with that. And it's not that we have to dig in and talk about all our painful stuff. There are ways that we can reduce the emotions without somebody having to live through it all again. Definitely, that's not what we want to do. We want to put safety in place. We want to bring those emotions down so that they are manageable. Because there's no point in jumping straight in and just making ourselves feel
Mhm.
horrendous. It's about
Mhm.
small, manageable steps that don't overwhelm us. And if we've been through trauma, overwhelm can be the place that we go to. It
Yep.
almost feels safe being in overwhelm. And again, overwhelm is that kind of freeze response, which is designed to keep us safe. So everything our body is doing, it has a purpose. And when we can understand that, it's working for me. But now I can decide how I work with it rather than against it, which was very much what I was doing. I had
Mm-hmm.
such a bad relationship with my body, with my mind, with everything, because I thought it was all letting me down and making me miserable and attacking me.
Mm-hmm.
That was the
Yep.
message I was getting
Yep.
from the world. And I love that idea that our healing isn't about changing ourselves and becoming somebody else. No, it's about unbecoming all the things that we've taken on board throughout our lifetime that haven't been serving us.
That's so, so good. I almost want to come to your workshop. I'm ready to go. Can we do that now?
It's
It's
available online.
it sounds phenomenal. All right, so we can continue going, I'm sure, for the next 3 hours because we've got so much
Mm,
in common and some very aligned interests. However, we, I think, have come pretty close to our time. So I know that you have a freebie for us, a giveaway for anyone that's listening. So why don't you sort of run down what that is, and then I will also make sure that it is linked in the notes.
thank you. It's called Wild Way Guide, and it's basically taking my acronym WILD
Mhm,
and breaking it down, talking about each of the different letters and how that how living a wild life supports our well-being. And it is all about that perception that
mhm,
it's how we choose, we get to choose how we look at the world and how we relate to the world and how we look at ourselves and relate to ourselves and our place in the world. And when we can do that from a supportive, uplifting perspective, it does so much for our well-being and gives us those tools and resources, gives us access to those tools and resources. They're always there, but
mhm,
a lot of the time in our current world, I don't think we realize they're there. We aren't able, for whatever reason, to give ourselves permission to access them and use them, put them into action in our lives. So that's what Wild
mhm,
is about. And it's a process. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a follow these steps. It's take this, adopt it, and adapt it, and use it in your situation from who you are, whoever you are, and play with it.
mhm.
Don't feel that
Sure.
it's something you have to follow strictly or you can do it a right way and a wrong way. No, just play.
Mhm. I think the thing that hits me most is just the name of this guide is, it feels like, because it's the wild guide, it feels so crazy and free and like,
Mm,
I'm gonna go wild. But
yes.
also it's done in such a way that's so loving and supportive and helps you just sort of land a little bit more closely in who you are and who you want to be and falling into your purpose. So I love the way that all sort of comes together and the way that feels. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, giving ourselves permissions to go wild and just to
Mm,
be ourselves and to love it
mm.
and to
Yeah.
I posted something a while ago and it came up as a Facebook memory yesterday. The moon doesn't worry about making waves. It does it
Sure
all the
doesn't.
time. So why
Yeah,
do we worry
and
about
we
it?
love the waves. We love the waves.
Yeah, yeah. So why limit ourselves and not allow ourselves to be fully ourselves,
Mm.
worrying
Mhm,
about what anybody else thinks?
mhm,
Because when we can be ourselves and be wild and be wacky and be weird,
mhm.
then if you think about the people that you love to hear from or love to listen to or watch or that friend that you really like to spend time with because they just make you laugh.
Yep,
Aren't they the wild, weird, wacky
yep,
people?
the quirky, the eccentric,
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
embraced exactly who they are, and they're happy to do that and share
And they
that.
make us happy being
Mhm,
in their
mhm.
atmosphere. Yeah.
So true. So true. This was so good. I really do want to keep talking for the next 3 hours, but we can't do that. So I think we're going to have to do something again. But in the meantime, I thank you so much for coming on today. I really love this. And for all of our listeners, I will put everything that we've talked about, the book, the her Robin's website, the freebie guide, all of that in the notes so that you have access to it. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tanya. It's
You
been absolutely wonderful chatting with you.
you are very welcome.